Sir, I need to tell you something. I am pregnant, and the child is yours.
What nonsense are you talking about? Do you think you can just accuse me of something like that?
No, sir. I am not lying. I'm only telling you the truth.
What, you cheap dirty beggar? You think you can trap me with a lie like this? Take this money and disappear. I will never claim a child from someone like you.
But in that moment, Amina did something no one expected. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She didn't touch the money. Instead, she looked at him calmly and said just two sentences. One day, you will understand the truth. But by the time you do, it will already be too late. And that was the last time anyone ever saw the mysterious maid. What Obinna didn't know was that this decision would become his greatest regret ever. The city of Lagos glittered like a kingdom made of glass and gold. Luxury cars roared through wide highways. Skyscrapers pierced the clouds. Neon lights turned night into day. Business deals worth millions were made behind the glass walls of powerful offices. And above all of it stood one man whose wealth seemed almost supernatural. Obinna. At only 34 years old, he had built an empire worth billions. Oil, shipping, real estate, technology. Every industry he touched seemed to turn into gold. To the world, he was the definition of success. People admired him, but they also feared him. Because Obinna had something far stronger than ambition. He had pride. A pride so powerful that it blinded him to the humanity of others. To him, the world was simple. There were people born to command. And people born to serve. And those who served would forever remain beneath him. His mansion sat high on Banana Island like a modern palace, guarded by iron gates and security cameras that never slept. Inside the mansion worked over 30 staff members. Drivers, chefs, cleaners, security guards. And among them was a quiet young woman no one paid much attention to. Her name was Amina. She was just another maid. At least, that was what everyone believed. Every morning before sunrise, Amina swept the marble floors and polished the long golden staircase that led to the billionaire's private quarters. She rarely spoke. She never complained. And she carried herself with a strange calm dignity that made some of the workers wonder about her. But the billionaire himself barely noticed she existed. To him, she was invisible. Some of the servants had worked in the mansion for years. But Amina had arrived only 6 months earlier. She never spoke about her past. Whenever anyone asked where she came from, she would simply smile and say, "From far away." Her eyes held a quiet intelligence. And sometimes, late at night when the house fell silent, she could be seen reading thick books about economics, leadership, and philosophy. The security guard once asked her jokingly, "Why would a maid read books meant for CEOs?" Amina only smiled. Knowledge belongs to everyone. No one knew that hidden in a small wooden box beneath her bed were documents worth millions. And a name that could change everything. Obinna loved power more than anything. Every week he hosted extravagant parties where politicians, celebrities, and international investors gathered beneath chandeliers the size of cars. But behind closed doors, the billionaire had a darker side. He treated his staff harshly. One wrong step. One broken glass. One small mistake. And someone could lose their job instantly. Servants must always remember their place, he often said. To him, kindness was weakness. Compassion was foolishness. And humility was something only poor people needed. One night, a violent storm rolled over Lagos. Thunder shook the sky. Lightning flashed across the ocean. Inside the mansion, most of the staff had already gone to sleep. Obinna returned home late, drunk, angry, and emotionally unstable after losing a major business deal at a party. Because of the heavy rain and lightning, the mansion experienced a sudden power outage, leaving the entire hallway completely dark. At that same time, Amina was still walking upstairs cleaning the corridor. When Obinna stumbled through the hallway in the darkness, he was not thinking clearly because of the alcohol and his frustration. In that moment of confusion, he approached Amina and mistakenly believed she was someone else, possibly a woman he had been expecting or someone from the party. Because of the darkness and his drunken state, he acted impulsively and initiated an intimate encounter with her. Amina, shocked and frightened, tried to resist and explain the situation. "Sir, please," she tried to say, her voice trembling. But Obinna was too intoxicated to understand what was happening. The anger, the alcohol, and the darkness clouded his judgment. In that moment of confusion, he ignored her words and her fear, and forced himself on her. The storm outside roared louder, thunder shaking the windows as the terrible mistake unfolded. When the electricity finally returned and the lights flickered back to life, the storm was slowly fading. But the damage had already been done. Obinna left Amina alone in the hallway in her miserable condition and went to his room. Slowly and silently, Amina returned to her small room. And for the first time since she arrived at the mansion, tears rolled down her face as she sat alone in the darkness. Upstairs, Obinna collapsed into his bed, his mind clouded by alcohol. By morning, he barely remembered what had happened the night before. But Amina remembered everything. She chose to remain silent and continue walking, knowing that speaking about it might lead to humiliation, disbelief, or losing her job. Weeks passed after the stormy night. At first, Amina tried to push the memory out of her mind and continued walking quietly in the mansion. But something began to feel different. She started waking up in the mornings with strange waves of nausea. Sometimes the feeling came so suddenly that she had to rush outside to vomit. Certain smells from the kitchen, smells she once loved, now made her stomach turn. Her body felt unusually tired, even after a full night's rest. At first, she told herself it was nothing. Maybe stress. Maybe it was simply exhaustion from the long hours of work. For days she had been pushing her body without rest, and she convinced herself that the weakness she felt was only tiredness. But as the days passed, the strange symptoms did not go away. Instead, new ones began to appear. Along with the nausea, she started craving bitter foods. Things she had never desired before. That was when a quiet worry began to grow in her heart. Something inside her was changing, and deep down, she already suspected what it might be. But as the days passed, the signs became harder to ignore. One evening after finishing her duties, Amina quietly left the mansion and walked to a small pharmacy a few streets away. Her heart beat nervously as she stood before the counter. "Can I help you?" the pharmacist asked gently. Amina hesitated for a moment before speaking softly. I need a pregnancy test." The pharmacist handed her a small box. Amina paid quickly and returned to the mansion before anyone noticed she had gone out. Later that night, inside the privacy of her small servant's room, she sat on the edge of her bed staring at the test in her hands. Her fingers trembled. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, the result appeared. 2 lines. Amina's breath caught in her throat. She placed her hand slowly over her stomach, her mind spinning with fear, uncertainty, and a future she never imagined. She was pregnant. Deep in her heart, she knew that the moment during the storm was the event that had led to the pregnancy. For hours, she sat quietly in her small servant's room, staring at the floor. She knew what this meant. Deep down, she also knew the kind of man Obinna was. Still, after a long and painful silence, she made up her mind. No matter what happened, she had to tell him the truth. After gathering what little courage she had left, Amina finally approached Obinna. Her hands trembled slightly as she stood before him, her heart pounding heavily in her chest. For a moment, the words refused to come out. "Sir, there is something I need to tell you," she said quietly. Obinna looked at her with impatience, clearly annoyed at being interrupted. Taking a deep breath, Amina forced herself to speak the truth. I am pregnant," she said softly. For a brief moment, the room fell into a heavy silence. Obinna frowned, clearly confused and irritated. "So you are pregnant," he said coldly. "What does that have to do with me?" Amina swallowed hard. Her hands trembled slightly, but she forced herself to speak. "Sir, you are the one responsible," she said quietly. Obinna's expression darkened immediately. "What nonsense are you talking about?" he snapped. Amina gathered her courage and began to explain, her voice trembling. "Sir, it was that night during the storm," she said quietly. "You had just returned from a party. You were drunk and very angry." She paused, trying to steady herself. The rain was very heavy that night, and lightning was everywhere. Then suddenly, the power went out, and the whole mansion became dark. Obinna said nothing, but his expression hardened. "I was upstairs at the time, cleaning the corridor," Amina continued softly. "When you came through the hallway, you were stumbling. Because of the alcohol, you were not thinking clearly." Her hands trembled as she spoke. "In the darkness, you approached me. I think you believed I was someone else, maybe someone you were expecting from the party." She lowered her eyes. "I tried to explain. I tried to tell you it was me." Her voice shook. "But you could not understand what was happening. The alcohol and the anger, everything clouded your mind." She took a slow breath before continuing. "You ignored my words," she whispered. "And in that moment, you forced yourself on me. When the electricity finally came back and the lights returned, you left me there, then went to your room." Amina's voice dropped almost to a whisper. "That is how it happened." For a moment, the room was completely silent. Then suddenly, Obinna let out a sharp, angry laugh. "Are you serious?" he said harshly. "You expect me to believe that story?" His face hardened as anger rose in his eyes. "You think you can just walk in here, accuse me of something like that, and trap me with a pregnancy?" Amina shook her head quickly, tears forming in her eyes. "No, sir. I am not lying," she said softly. "I only came to tell you the truth." But Obinna was already pacing the room, his temper rising. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "Do you know who I am? Do you understand what kind of accusation you are making?" Amina stood there silently, her hands shaking. "I am not accusing you, sir," she said quietly. "I am only telling you what happened." But the more she spoke, the angrier Obinna became. The news had struck his pride, his reputation, and his control. And his reaction was explosive. His voice echoed through the mansion like thunder. His face twisted with disgust. "You cheap, dirty beggar," he shouted. "You think you can trap me with a lie like this?" The other servants watched in stunned silence. With a furious motion, Obinna grabbed a stack of money from the table and threw it onto the floor in front of her. "Take this and disappear," he said coldly. "I will never claim a child from someone like you." The words cut deeper than knives. For a moment, no one moved. But Amina did something unexpected. She did not cry. She did not beg. And she did not even touch the money lying on the floor. Instead, she lifted her head and looked at him calmly. Then one quiet sentence left her lips. "One day, you will understand the truth. But by the time you do, it will already be too late." Without another word, she turned and walked away. Her footsteps slowly faded down the hallway of the great mansion. Amina went to her room, packed her clothes, and quietly walked out of the mansion. And from that day on, no one in the house ever saw the mysterious maid again. At first, Obinna forgot about Amina completely. Business consumed his life. Meetings, negotiations, investments, and endless travel filled his days and nights. In his world, there was always another deal to chase and another fortune to build. Amina became nothing more than a distant memory. But slowly, something strange began to happen. At first, the changes were small. One shipment of imported goods arrived weeks late, causing him to lose an important contract. Then a business partner suddenly withdrew from a joint project without giving a clear explanation. Obinna dismissed these things as ordinary business problems. Setbacks happen, he told himself confidently. But the setbacks did not stop. A few months later, one of his cargo ships vanished during a routine voyage across the ocean. The company searched for weeks, but the vessel was never found. Not long after that, another deal collapsed at the last minute when investors suddenly pulled out. Obinna grew irritated, but he still believed everything was under control. Yet the problems kept multiplying. Suppliers began refusing to extend credit. Long-trusted partners slowly distanced themselves from him. Even loyal employees started resigning without warning. Within 1 year, small cracks began to appear in the great empire he had spent decades building. Profits shrank. Projects stalled. Several companies under his control quietly shut their doors. For the first time in many years, Obinna began to feel a shadow of worry. But the worst was still ahead. Within 2 years, the cracks turned into deep fractures. Banks began demanding immediate repayment of massive loans. Lawsuits appeared from different directions, each one threatening to drain millions from his fortune. Government contracts he once controlled so easily were suddenly cancelled without explanation. One by one, the pillars of his empire began to fall. The once powerful businessman who had commanded respect everywhere he went now found doors slowly closing in front of him. People in the city began whispering among themselves. Some said the billionaire had simply become careless. Others said his enemies were finally destroying him. And some, lowering their voices carefully, spoke about something else entirely. They said that sometimes in life, when a man does something terribly wrong, fortune itself may decide to turn against him. But the truth behind Obinna's fall was far more complicated and far more mysterious. One evening, a former business partner revealed something shocking to Obinna. A powerful international investment group had secretly been buying up the pieces of Obinna's failing empire. Every company he lost, every contract that slipped through his fingers, every property he was forced to sell, had been quietly acquired by the same unknown organization. No one knew who controlled it. Only one name appeared on the documents: the Amina Hope Foundation. When Obinna heard the name, his heart skipped for a moment. A strange feeling passed through him. But he quickly dismissed the thought. It couldn't possibly be the same person. Or could it? Before he could find the answer, another disaster struck. One morning, government investigators arrived at his office without warning. Their faces were serious as they presented documents and legal orders. Obinna was being investigated for bribery and corruption connected to several past government contracts. He was stunned. "I have done nothing wrong," he insisted. But the evidence against him seemed overwhelming. Secret bank transfers, signed agreements, witness statements. Every piece of proof pointed directly at him. Within weeks, the news spread across the country. The once respected billionaire was now being called a corrupt businessman who had built his empire through illegal payments. Banks froze his accounts. Investors fled. The last companies under his control collapsed almost overnight. In court, Obinna tried desperately to defend himself, insisting he had been framed. But the damage was already done. The judge ordered the seizure of his remaining assets to settle debts and legal penalties. The mansion was taken. His businesses were sold. His reputation was destroyed. In the end, Obinna, the man who once controlled an empire, walked out of the courthouse with nothing. No wealth. No power. No allies. Everything he had built was gone. And somewhere, hidden behind the quiet power of a mysterious organization, the name Amina Hope Foundation continued to appear on document after document, silently owning the pieces of the empire he had lost. Months later, after losing everything, Obinna left Lagos. The man who once owned private jets now traveled alone by bus along dusty rural roads. The journey was long and uncomfortable, the heat pressing through the cracked windows as the bus rattled across rough terrain. No one on the bus recognized him. Once, his name had opened doors everywhere. Now he sat quietly among farmers, traders, and travelers, listening to their conversations like an ordinary man. He had come to a small northern village after hearing rumors about a powerful humanitarian organization transforming entire communities. At first, he thought the stories were exaggerated. As the bus stopped at the edge of the village, he began to see the changes with his own eyes. Wide clean roads cut through the settlement. New wells provided clear water where people once walked miles to fetch it. Solar lamps stood along the paths, lighting the village even as the sun began to set. Hospitals, schools, farms, water systems. Thousands of lives were being changed. Farmers spoke proudly about new equipment and training programs that had increased their harvest. Mothers talked about free medical care for their children. Young students carried new books as they walked toward modern classrooms. And everywhere he went, the same name kept appearing. Amina. Curiosity and unease slowly began to grow inside Obinna. Who is this woman? As he walked toward the center of the village, a large building came into view. It was new, bright, and full of life. Dozens of villagers stood outside, some waiting patiently, others smiling with relief as doctors and nurses moved in and out. It was a hospital. Above the entrance stood a shining golden sign. Billionaire Hope Foundation. Obinna stopped walking. His heart began pounding heavily in his chest. Memories he had tried to bury suddenly rushed back to him. The storm. The darkness. The frightened voice of a young maid. And the quiet words she had spoken before leaving. One day, you will understand the truth. He stared at the name on the building, unable to move. For the first time since losing everything, a frightening thought entered his mind. What if the mysterious force that had slowly taken his empire had been watching him all along? And what if the woman behind it was the same one he had once thrown out of his house? Just then, the hospital doors slowly opened. And someone stepped outside. Inside the hospital courtyard stood a woman speaking to doctors and community leaders. She was dressed in elegant traditional clothing. Confident. Respected. Powerful. It was Amina. But she was no longer the quiet maid he once ignored. Standing beside her was a young boy with bright, curious eyes. The boy looked almost exactly like him. Obinna felt the world spin. When Amina saw him, she was not surprised. She had known this moment would come someday. You finally found your way here, she said calmly. Obinna struggled to speak. How is this possible? Amina looked toward the children playing outside the hospital and spoke calmly. My father was a king, she said quietly. A traditional ruler with wealth far greater than yours. Obinna froze. But he believed true leaders must understand the struggles of ordinary people. So he sent me to live among them. I chose to work as a maid to learn humility. Her voice grew softer. But you never saw me as human. Obinna's legs gave way beneath him. He collapsed to his knees. Everything he believed about power suddenly felt meaningless. The maid he insulted, the woman he rejected, was not only wealthy. She had become one of the most influential humanitarian leaders in Africa. The little boy looked up at him curiously. Mother, who is that man? Amina paused. Then she answered with gentle honesty. Someone who once believed money made him powerful. She placed a hand on her son's shoulder. But today he has the chance to learn what true wealth really means. Obinna looked around at the hospital, the schools, the farms feeding hundreds of families. And he finally understood the truth. His billions had built towers. But her compassion had built hope. The man who once commanded billion-dollar empires now trembled like a broken soul. Slowly, villagers stopped walking. Doctors and nurses paused. Even the wind seemed to fall silent. The proud billionaire had fallen. Tears filled his eyes as he looked at Amina. I was blind, he whispered. I let my pride destroy everything. I insulted you, humiliated you, and threw you away like you meant nothing. His voice cracked with regret. Please, forgive me. For a long moment, Amina said nothing. She looked at him calmly, with the same quiet dignity she carried even when she was just a maid. Then she spoke softly. I forgave you a long time ago. Obinna lifted his head slowly. Hope flickered in his eyes. His gaze moved toward the young boy standing beside her. The child looked curious but cautious. Is he? Obinna's voice trembled. Is he my son? Amina's expression did not change. No. The single word struck him like thunder. But, he stammered. You said you were pregnant when you left my house. Amina nodded. Yes. She looked directly into his eyes. But from the day you called me dirty, from the day you threw money at me and treated me like I was nothing. She paused. That day, the child stopped being yours. The words cut deeper than any punishment. Obinna's shoulders collapsed. But I want to be part of his life, he pleaded desperately. I want to know my son, to watch him grow, please. The boy held Amina's hand tightly. Amina shook her head gently. No. Silence hung heavy in the air. Obinna's voice grew more desperate. Then at least help me rebuild my business. You are powerful now. You could help me recover everything I lost. For the first time, a faint smile appeared on Amina's face. But it was not a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who had already learned the lesson life wanted to teach. If you want help, she said calmly, go join the queue. Obinna frowned in confusion. What queue? Amina turned and pointed toward a long line of villagers outside the hospital gates. Hundreds of people stood patiently waiting. Farmers, widows, elderly men, hungry children, all waiting for humanitarian aid. The same people you once called beggars, Amina said. If you truly need help, stand with them. Obinna turned and looked at the line. For the first time in his life, he realized he now belonged there. When he turned back, Amina was already walking away with the boy. The child looked back once. But Amina did not. She simply continued forward, her son's hand in hers, leaving the broken billionaire kneeling in the dust of his own regret. And for the first time in his life, Obinna understood the truth. Money can buy power, but character is what decides whether a man deserves it. Obinna remained kneeling in the dust long after Amina and the boy disappeared into the hospital courtyard. The once powerful billionaire slowly stood and looked again at the long line of villagers waiting for humanitarian aid. For the first time in his life, he walked toward them. Quietly, humbly. No guards. No luxury cars. No power. Just a broken man carrying the weight of his own choices. As he joined the end of the line, an old woman in front of him turned and studied his face carefully. Her eyes widened slightly. "Aren't you Obinna?" she asked. The man who once hated being questioned now lowered his head. "Yes," he replied softly. The old woman smiled gently and moved aside to give him space. "Then today you have finally become rich," she said. Obinna looked at her, confused. "How?" he asked. The woman pointed toward the front of the line where volunteers were serving food and medicine. "Because today," she said, "you finally know what it means to stand among human beings." Obinna said nothing. He simply remained in the line, waiting, just like everyone else. Pride builds walls. Humility builds legacies. And sometimes the person we look down on today is the very person destiny will raise above us tomorrow. Before you go, I want to ask you something. If you were in Amina's position, after everything the Obinna did to her, the insults, the humiliation, the rejection, would you have forgiven him? And even if you forgave him, would you ever allow him back into your son's life? Or do you think he deserved exactly the fate he received? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd really like to hear what you think. And if you enjoy powerful African stories filled with deep lessons about pride, destiny, and the choices we make in life, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to ARAVOS-TV so you never miss the next story.